Hello everyone, and welcome to A Teacher Explains.
I'm a teacher, and in this explainer, I'm going to explain media cognition and information processing theories. For the longest time, the big question was always, what does the media do to people? But researchers realize that's not quite the right question. The much more interesting one, the one we're digging into here, is what do our minds do with the media? It's a huge shift, right? It takes us from being passive targets to being active players who are constantly selecting, interpreting, and making sense of everything we see. So, here's our roadmap. We're going to break this down into 5 key parts. We'll start with how media theory evolved over time. Then we'll get into why our brains have some serious processing limits. From there, we'll uncover the mental shortcuts we all use to cope with information overload. Then we'll see how those shortcuts can make us open to persuasion. And finally, we'll look at the modern idea that feeling is a huge part of thinking. First things first, let's talk about the big picture shift and how we even think about media's power, moving away from a fear of propaganda towards an understanding of cognitive processing. Back in the early 20th century, the dominant fear was propaganda, this idea that media could act like a magic bullet, directly manipulating how people think. But by the middle of the century, studies started showing that media effects were actually pretty limited and varied a lot from person to person. The real breakthrough, though, happened in the 1970s. With the rise of cognitive psychology, the focus completely changed. We stopped seeing people as passive sponges and started recognizing them as active meaning makers. So, if we are active processors, what's our main limitation? Well, it all comes down to a simple truth. Our brains can only juggle so much information at one time. Think of your brain like a computer, but one with a limited amount of RAM. That's the core idea of information processing theory. Just like a computer, our minds have to encode, store, and retrieve information. But because that mental bandwidth is so precious and so limited, we are constantly filtering. The vast majority of information coming at us never even gets consciously processed. And this leads to a pretty stunning conclusion. We aren't information absorbers, just soaking it all in. In fact, we're the opposite. We are information avoiders. Our selective attention acts like a bouncer at a club, and only a tiny fraction of the media we encounter ever makes it past the velvet rope into our conscious mind. This idea has huge implications for how we engage with different media. Take TV news, for instance. With its rapid cuts, scrolling text, graphics, and narration all happening at once, it can easily overwhelm our cognitive system. This overload encourages us to just sit back and watch passively, which is why we often have a hard time remembering the actual facts. It's what leads some to say the format itself is biased against understanding. Okay, so if our brains are so easily swamped with information, how do we possibly get through the day? Well, we survive the information storm by using mental shortcuts. These shortcuts are what schema theory is all about. Schemas are basically mental file folders we create from our past experiences. They help us quickly categorize new information so we don't have to start from scratch every single time. This allows us to be cognitive misers. We're always trying to save mental energy. It's super efficient, but it can also lead us to oversimplify things. When you see a news story, your brain instantly activates these schemas. You might use a story schema to fit it into a familiar plot, or an effect schema to quickly assign a cause. You'll definitely use a person schema, which, yes, can sometimes be a stereotype, to judge the people involved. We even use cultural schemas to help us decide the emotional meaning of it all. Now, this reliance on schemas totally changes how we should think about memory. Our memory is not a video recorder that you can just rewind and play back perfectly. No, memory is reconstructed. Every time you remember something, you are literally rebuilding it from fragments, and you use your schemas to fill in the gaps. That means your memory of a news report is always a combination of what actually happened and what your brain's existing framework thinks should have happened. Now that we know our brains are using these shortcuts, let's explore how those very shortcuts can be used to persuade us. This is where media influence gets really interesting. The elaboration likelihood model gives us a great map here. It suggests there are 2 main ways our minds can be changed. There's the central route. That's when we're really engaged. We're scrutinizing arguments, weighing the evidence, thinking logically. It takes a lot of effort. Then there's the peripheral route. This is the low-effort path, where we're influenced by simple cues like an emotional appeal or maybe how credible a speaker seems. The central route creates strong, lasting attitudes, while the peripheral route leads to attitudes that are much more temporary. And stories are one of the most effective ways to persuade us because they allow us to lower our guard. Narrative persuasion theory calls this transportation. When we get completely lost in a good story and we start to identify with the characters, our critical brain, the part that looks for logical flaws and counterarguments, it just kind of switches off. Here is a powerful example of how much our own minds shape our reality. It's called the hostile media effect. It describes what happens when people with very strong opinions on a subject view a perfectly neutral, balanced piece of media coverage. They will almost always perceive it as being biased against them. It's this fascinating reminder that we don't just see the media, we see it through the lens of our own deeply held beliefs. This all brings us right up to the modern frontier of media cognition, where that classic old-school distinction between emotion and reason completely falls apart. A great example of this is affective intelligence theory. It argues that emotions aren't the enemy of reason. They're more like its director. Think of your emotions as your brain's internal alert system. Anxiety makes you pay closer attention and think more carefully. Enthusiasm pushes you to learn more. So in this view, emotion isn't what clouds our judgment. It's what tells our rational brain what to focus on in the first place. This dance between emotion and cognition is at the heart of what's called motivated reasoning. This is our tendency to process information not to find some objective truth, but to defend our existing beliefs and protect our group identity. When our identity feels like it's on the line, the goal of processing information suddenly shifts from accuracy to reinforcement. A really stark example of motivated reasoning in action is the backfire effect. So, step 1, a person holds a strong but totally false belief. Step 2, they're presented with clear factual evidence that contradicts it. So what happens? Instead of changing their mind, step 3, the correction actually backfires, causing them to double down and hold their original false belief even more strongly. It's a powerful defense mechanism. This dynamic is captured perfectly in psychologist Daniel Kahneman's dual process model. He argues we have 2 systems of thought. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. It's our gut reaction. System 2 is our slow, deliberate, logical brain. So much of modern media is designed to appeal directly to our quick, effortless System 1, which allows it to effectively bypass our more critical and analytical System 2. So, let's just quickly recap the main insights here. First, media influence isn't a one-way street. It's a cognitive and interpretive process. Second, we are active thinkers, but our brains have a strict processing limit. Third, to get by, we rely on mental shortcuts or schemas to make sense of everything. And finally, thinking and feeling are not enemies. They are deeply intertwined partners in how we process the world. This leaves us with a really critical question for today's world. In an age where algorithms are personalizing our information feeds and amplifying content that triggers our cognitive shortcuts and our emotional biases, how does that affect our ability to form a coherent, shared understanding of reality? The information presented in this explainer was drawn from the sources you see on the screen.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.